Joining us now to discuss more on the Tim Walz VP selection, we've got Will Chamberlain, kind of a new right conservative activist writer,
attorney,
and an attorney as well, and we've got Cenk Uygur, host of TYT's main show. Cenk, Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Cenk, let's start with you, because talk to us about how you were feeling during the kind of Veep stakes competition, which interestingly was kind of what we had been proposing Democrats do for their actual nomination, is to have this kind of an open process where it wasn't necessarily going to lead to actual people voting, but by the general vibes of the country, somebody would emerge as an obvious favorite, and that seemed to happen here. Like it was a participatory democratic process, even if nobody got to go and actually cast votes. So how did you feel about the kind of VP selection before, before the process kicked off, and how did you feel about it by the end of it?
Yeah, I felt many different things. First of all, I felt told you. Second of all, apprehension. And then at the end, elation. So told you as in, look at all these amazing Democratic candidates. This is why we thought that Biden should step aside, because the idea that Biden was the best that the Democrats had to offer was so preposterous at this late stage in his life. I'm like, how about the governor of Pennsylvania or Michigan or Kentucky or apparently Minnesota? And it turned out when we looked into them, they were all fantastic. I told you. Of course, there's a lot of great Democrats out there. Now, the apprehension part was, I was like, oh no, here we go again with the Democrats. With all these great candidates out there, if they pick like a Mark Kelly snooze fest because they think they already have this thing won, or even worse, the corporate Lego man, Pete Buttigieg, all this will have been for naught, and then I would have put them back as underdogs. But they didn't. They didn't. And at the end, I felt elation as I can't believe they made the best pick. I can't believe that the last two were the best two, Josh Shapiro and Tim Walz. So that couldn't have got any better.
Well, let's start electorally. So just cynically, like setting aside what you think about the policies that this ticket is going to put forward, electorally from your perspective on the right, how do you think this pick plays?
Which, by the way, I want to add is an important addition to what Cenk just said, is that, is Tim Walz a good candidate, to Ryan's point? Is he a good candidate for Democrats, or do his vulnerabilities, as you see them, outweigh the potential advantages that he brings to the ticket?
I think among the finalists, he's the pick we're happiest to see as Republicans. We were worried about Josh Shapiro. We think that Josh Shapiro has massive favorability ratings in what's most likely to be the tipping point state. If you saw him speak yesterday at that rally, he's a hell of an orator. Like, just real talk, the guy can speak. That he made a pretty good joke too when people said he was compared to Barack Obama. He's like, well, Obama's a pretty good orator, so I'm not upset about that comparison. So we were worried about Shapiro. Tim Walz makes this a very simple election. It's Make America Great Again versus Make America Burn Again. They are going to have the Minneapolis riots hanging over their head for the next 3 months. It's going to be an immigration and crime election. They're going to have to explain why Tim Walz decided to let rioters run wild while he twiddled his thumbs, and then why Kamala Harris promoted a fund to bail those rioters out.
Yeah, what do you think, Cenk?
All right, first of all, let's all be amused by the idea of someone who definitely should not be running. If they didn't call the National Guard soon enough and they just twiddled their thumbs while there was a riot happening, like on January 6th. Awkward. Okay, so listen, it's hilarious that we have agreement here. He thinks Tim Walz is the best candidate for them. I think Tim Walz is the best candidate for us. The brother passed all these wonderful laws that are intensely popular. Paid family leave, free lunches for poor kids. By the way, free college for lower income families so they can compete with rich families, which Republicans are going to hate. And they did hate. They voted against it. He's passed so many economically populist bills, and then just popular bills like legalizing marijuana. And so all of these poll at over 70%. So if they're going to run on Tim Walz's record, they're going to run straight into our iceberg. And I love it. Please make the case against the American people, how they shouldn't have paid family leave. They shouldn't have child tax credits. They shouldn't have abortion rights. Go for it. Go for it. Make our day. By the way, don't get me wrong. I like Josh Shapiro. I favor Josh Shapiro. But this whole thing that they do after every pick is like, well, if you'd picked the other guy, that would have we would have been scared of that guy. But you picked this guy, we're thrilled. I've seen this 2,000 times over.
So, Will, I imagine what was going through your head, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as Cenk was talking about some of these popular and sort of genuinely populist economic policies that the likes of Sohrab Ahmari and others, even on the new right, have looked at and said, there's some interesting stuff in here economically that is popular with voters, whether or not it's right or wrong, popular with voters at the very least. What was probably coming through your mind was some of the cultural policies that Walz has passed. So that would be on LGBT issues, immigration issues, the way he's talked about both of those issues that create vulnerabilities for him. So is that something that, as Republicans are looking at this, you think drags Walz down, drags Kamala Harris down from now until November, Will?
Yeah, I mean, it's not 2012. Mitt Romney's not at the top of the ticket with Paul Ryan. We're not about to run on, cutting entitlement spending or bending the cost curve or whatever. So it's a very different Republican Party. The head of the Teamsters spoke at the Republican convention. We're not going to be running on child tax credits are bad. The real problem with Walz, first off, obviously, immigration. Walz has allowed for taxpayer money to go to paying for illegal immigrants' college. That's something we're certainly going to run on. I'm generally of the view that American taxpayers' money should benefit American citizens and not the opposite. He's got some very big issues on the trans stuff. It's not merely do trans people exist. This is stuff like he's going to make it impossible for red states to set laws that prohibit transgender surgeries on children. I like, as much as Cenk wants to say this stuff is popular, this stuff is not popular. Beacons of reactionary conservatism like England and Norway and Sweden have banned all these treatments. This is stuff that's not going to go well with the broader public. And then there's also the biggest issue, which I think with Walz, which really hasn't been covered. He's a deployment dodger. He was in the National Guard. He was the leader of a unit. And the moment that the Iraq War, that his unit was about to deploy, he just said, sorry, guys, have fun, and just let them all go off to Iraq. And 3 of them died.
Okay, let me answer that. So the brother was in the National Guard for 27 years. He got at least 3 medals that I saw. And he enlisted. He's the highest enlisted ranked member of the armed services to ever serve in Congress. And you're going to compare him to Commander Bone Spurs, who ran from Vietnam, and they asked him, hey, your daddy wrote you a note about how you had bone spurs in your ankle. Which ankle was it? And he's like, I don't, maybe both. Your guy's a total, utter coward. He ran from Vietnam and then later bragged that his Vietnam was dodging STDs at the orgies he was going to. So you want to compare him to a guy who served for 27 years? Have at it, Hoss.
Yeah, I'll go right back at you on that. My guy's the guy who got shot in the face and got up screaming, fight, fight, fight. Your guy, who's a 47-year-old man supervising teenagers and young men who are about to go to the war, leading them for years. The moment they're about to deploy, walks off the job. Total loser. Anybody's a coward in this race, it's Tim Walz.
You're nuts. So you're saying actually defending the country is cowardly if you do it for decades on end and you win several
When did he defend the country?
Hold on.
The one chance he had a chance to do it, he quit.
You don't get to talk over me.
Sorry. Okay, fair enough.
And then wins the Nebraska Citizen Soldier of the Year. He wins every award there is. And then you go, well, no, you didn't serve 30 years. You didn't serve 40 years. Your guy served 0 years.
Okay, so Cenk, though, could you respond to what Will said about immigration, trans issues, causing vulnerabilities for Walz? I mean, it is true that as popular as some of those economic policies might be, those are way more fraught issues. And Walz, who really relied on Minneapolis to win his gubernatorial election, as Steve Kornacki pointed out on MSNBC yesterday, those are tougher sells outside of Minneapolis on some of those big cultural issues.
Yeah, I understand that. So again, though, I want to make sure that everybody understands that Donald Trump is a giant coward who ran for Vietnam and wanted poor people and middle-class people to die on his behalf. But to be fair, his daddy's doctor note was really sterling, well paid for. Okay, so now in terms of those issues, look, it depends on how you ask the questions on immigration, trans rights, et cetera. And so if you say, oh my God, the police department and the fire department in Minnesota are wrong. They shouldn't have driver's licenses, even though it would make the cops' lives much, much easier in identifying them. And I can't believe that an undocumented immigrant would ever get anything. They should be demonized and we should hate them and we should pretend that they're evil. Okay, you can go that route. You could run a hate-filled campaign. And by the way, it might resonate with some people. I get it. But we're going to come back and double down on how he helped the average American, and his economic bills are overwhelmingly popular. Well, in fact, 90% of the bills that he's passed are overwhelmingly popular. Here's a guy who was a teacher, a football coach, and from the Midwest. I almost pulled a Trump and said from the Middle West. That's a thing that we say. Yeah. Okay, so look, compared to a loser, bankrupt businessman and a vulture capitalist, have at it, Hoss. Okay, tell us about how popular you guys are. And, we have the most popular billionaires and Wall Street tycoons on our side. Go for it, okay? But I don't think those are going to play well at all. I think they're going to get their asses handed to them.
What's your response to that one, Will?
Oh, I mean, I think like Tim Walz is just goofy. I think that's another thing about him. He's a really, I mean, think about Tim Walz. Here's the other thing. The guy made a sex joke in his announcement as VP, referencing this couch stuff. It'd be one thing if he was just doing that on some podcast. He's doing it on the speech where he's making himself known, and then he shakes his wife's hand. I don't know if I shake my wife's hand, I get slapped. The guy's ridiculous. And then I think also on this economic stuff, I mean, Minnesota is an economic basket case. It's actually, relative to other states, it's gotten far worse in the past few years. People are fleeing the state to Florida. He's not actually done a good job of managing his state. And then the state's also become a high crime state because he's so inept on crime, as demonstrated in Minneapolis in 2020.
Okay, it's the fifth best state for business. So this whole thing of extreme liberal is absurd. It's the third happiest state. And then I love every point about Tim Walz. It's as if they're talking about Donald Trump and don't realize it. That guy's really strange, says weird things. Can you believe he said inappropriate things? Really? A guy supporting Trump is going to tell us about how the other guy said inappropriate things, a vague joke about a couch? But you're not outraged that Trump was like, yeah, I grabbed him by the genitals. You don't think that's weird? That's totally normal. And then, oh my God, I can't believe he shook his wife's hand. Well, that's better than Trump. Melania won't even touch his hand. So, I mean, everything you say about Tim Walz is like on steroids, comically true of Donald Trump.
I mean, context seems pretty obviously different, what you say in private versus what you say at a rally. I mean, you make sex jokes at a rally.
Friends, oh yeah, I sexually assault people. That sounds great. Yeah, in private's way better.
Can we stick on the question of Walz's economic record, actually? Because, Cenk, can you flesh out that point about, this is something I've started to see coming from people actually within Minnesota who have said, Walz did pass these economic populist policies, but what he did with the money and the budget and all of that, is conservatives in Minnesota, unsurprisingly, will hammer Walz for having been bad on the economy. Your contention is that actually it's a benefit for him that he has, the economy that he's overseen in Minneapolis or in Minnesota is a benefit for him on the campaign trail.
Yeah, so look, first I should also acknowledge that the sexual assault that Donald Trump was convicted of was in public. He actually assaulted her in public. Yeah, what? He did. In a dressing room.
None of what you said is true. He was not convicted of a sexual assault. That is false.
A jury said he definitely did it, and it was in public.
It was a civil suit. It's not a conviction.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a civil suit where the jury said he definitely did sexual assault in public. Okay. So now to the economic issues. So look, he passes all these wonderful laws that help Americans. Like, look at paid family leave. That's Democrats saying, hey, moms should get, in that case, 20 weeks off after they have a baby so they could bond with the baby. And Republicans go, no, that would hurt corporate interests. Corporations want you to go back to work the next day. And so they all voted no. And they said, well, if you vote to have moms spend any time with their babies, and you know how much Republicans hate babies, and if you do that, my God, it's going to sink the economy. Except it didn't. It's the fifth best state for business. So not only did the average Minnesotan get a lot better situation, but you guys were all wrong. It didn't hurt business at all. So it's always been a mirage. It's the Republican Party is built to serve the rich, and serve corporations. So they don't want you to have one day with your baby at all. They don't want you sick leave. They don't want anything. They don't want child tax credit. They don't want any of that stuff because it would hurt their beloved corporations, they think, in their infinite greed. But it turns out it doesn't even hurt them. It still makes business perfectly happy. So he found a way to balance interests in a way that helped everyone. You can't argue with that.
And Will, I feel like Republicans are going to have two problems in going after Walz. And one is that, like you said, Walz seems like a pretty boring white guy, so painting him as a radical is going to be difficult. And Minnesota is Minnesota. And so painting it as Stephen Miller tried as like the next Mogadishu is going to be difficult. And like portraying it as some like, communist mecca is also going to be difficult because it's Minnesota. But maybe I'm wrong here. Like, what is your sense of how you guys are going to be able to turn Minnesota and Tim Walz into kind of scary figures?
We're just going to keep publishing the images and videos of Minneapolis in June 2020 over and over and over again. That's what we're going to do.
I feel like
the thumbs. I mean,
I think you're probably. I appreciate that. I suspect you will. I think that people are over that. Like that you're going to look like you're complaining about something that people are kind of ready to move past and are going to say, look, the protests were well-meaning. They were targeting a genuine injustice. They went overboard at times. We don't necessarily want to be reminded of that. Why are you guys reminding us? Maybe you're. Do you see my point? Like, I don't know if this is going to work for you.
I see how you're doing it, but I think that the sort of people who are swing voters in this election, I mean, you look at generally like what do swing voters care about? What are the Republicans' strongest issues with swing voters? Immigration, crime, inflation, right? Those three. Those are the ones. And crime is a big one. Like the defund the police stuff that Kamala has said in the past, abolish ICE stuff, that's all stuff that she's extremely worried about. That's why she spent like a whole week having her flacks go out there and claim that she wasn't the border czar. So like they're worried about this stuff. Tim Walz makes it much worse for them. This is where Josh Shapiro would have been a really much stronger candidate, more moderate, better on crime. But Tim Walz is just, it fits into the narrative because one of Kamala's weakest points is that she promoted that bail fund in Minneapolis. And Tim Walz is the governor of Minnesota who twiddled his thumbs.
And why, Cenk, is that not a huge problem for Walz, in your opinion?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. Number one, this is the same thing Democrats did about January 6th. They beat it into the ground, and they showed the video after video after video until people got bored of it. I'm kind of known for being honest about our side and the weaknesses in our side. And I don't think that was great political strategy. And right now, Republicans are making that same mistake. I think Ryan's exactly right. People get it. Hey, listen, George Floyd was one of the greatest injustices. I don't know. Maybe Republicans changed their minds and they think, maybe he had it coming or something. I don't know. Maybe they're going to defend Chauvin like they defended Kyle Rittenhouse and George Zimmerman. But in terms of the riots, he did call out the National Guard. They're saying, he didn't do it fast enough. But again, if your candidate is Donald Trump and he refused to call out the National Guard on January 6th and he sat around and enjoyed it while his own supporters chanted, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence, and he said he didn't mind, I don't think you get to make the case that, oh my God, there'll be chaos if the other guys are elected. So I just don't think that that's a winning issue for them. I think it feels old and stale, but they could run it. And when they do, again, it'll feel a little bit racial. And so I think that they can't help themselves. They keep attacking on race, on the fact that Kamala Harris is a woman. On Tim Walz, I mean, they got nothing because of what Ryan pointed out. It's Minnesota. He's a lovable old grandpa. He passed laws that the people of Minnesota are thrilled with. And so they're going to go to weird. But that's what he said about you guys. And everybody thinks that's true. So it just seems super weak. I don't think they have any case at all. Look, guys, just real quick on this. When Joe Biden was in the race, I said he had a 0% chance of winning. So it's not like I'm telling you, oh, yeah, rah, Democratic Party, they're so great. Now I think they're the clear favorites because his record in Minnesota is excellent. Kamala Harris has been terrific on the campaign trail. And now Donald Trump looks like the stale, old, tired guy who's still raving like a lunatic in the corner. I think they're in a world of hurt.
So Ryan made a point earlier in the show that about this exchange Stephen Miller had with someone about it was someone posting a picture of Tim Walz with his hunting gear on, like bird hunting, something like that, and said, how are you going to paint this guy as like a San Francisco liberal or a coastal elite or something? And Stephen Miller replied, he put tampons in girls' bathrooms, or in boys' bathrooms, I'm sorry, and the exchange went super viral. So Ryan was making the point that it backfires on Republicans because then they look like the middle-aged men who are obsessing over tampons or like forcing you to think about tampons. What's your response to that? Because to me, I actually think the Stephen Miller point is a pretty successful at undercutting the Dem argument that this is just your average, rural Minnesotan dad. But on the other hand, I do see Ryan's point.
I think the politics of that issue in particular have changed over the last 8 years, and that the general public is a lot less sympathetic to, especially when it comes to stuff about trans and kids. So I don't think it helps Tim Walz that he was like making his state a refuge for puberty blockers for children. I think that it's going to actually look bad for him. But more broadly, I think it's like generally it's just this hick-lib stuff where it's like, oh look, it's a liberal with a gun. That's going to persuade conservatives that he's just a fine guy. I mean, we've got so many obvious attacks. I mean, obviously the deployment dodger one is the biggest one. The guy's not going to have credibility among veterans. Every veteran's going to look at him and be like, you would have abandoned me when I was about to deploy. That's what they're going to look at him and say.
That's sick. That's really sick.
Cenk, I mean,
it's just true.
It's sick. You guys do it every time to actual veterans. It's an immoral line of attack. You did it to John Kerry after he took bullets for this country. Your guys are all chicken hawks. They're all loser cowards like Donald Trump, who ran from Vietnam, Dick Cheney, who never served, Tom DeLay, who said, oh, black people took my spot, otherwise I would have gone to Vietnam. They never served. They're always cowards. They always send other people to die. They're always rich people going, hey, why don't you poor middle-class people die for the wars that I start? And
except J.D. Vance.
27 years.
Yeah, J.D. Vance went to Iraq. What did Tim Walz do?
Okay, why don't you go serve for 27 years, then I'll judge you. I'll judge, you should have just stayed 28th year. I'm judging you.
So, Cenk, the knock on him that you're going to hear from the right is that it was May 16th, 2005, I guess, when Walz stepped aside, and as he retired, so this was after 20 plus years in the National Guard, but as he retired, his unit was about to deploy, and according to people in the unit, he had told those in the unit that he would deploy with them to Iraq. So that's going to be the hit. You think it doesn't land because they went after John Kerry, so they'll go after everybody, so they've lost. And
Cenk, let me add also that Chris LaCivita is the head of the Trump campaign with Susie Wiles right now. He is the architect of the Swift Boat ad campaign.
Of course, that's why he does this. He does this to every veteran who's served. Oh, you want to serve America? We're going to find a way to smear you. And we're going to pretend that you didn't get shot enough. We're going to pretend that you didn't serve long enough, even though our guys never served, and you served over 2 decades. But we're going to find a way to use that against you. So, hey, listen, if you're an average American and you like politics and you care about this country and you want to fix it, be careful. If you go into the armed services, the Republicans will viciously smear you later. Oh, he took a bathroom break once. I didn't like him. Yeah. He once did something I didn't like in training in the Army or in the National Guard. Okay, where was your guy? Oh, no, he didn't have a unit to deploy because his dad literally bribed a doctor to write a doctor's note about a bone spur he didn't have. So, Will, can you explain? I'm being serious because you're smearing a guy who served for decades. So I want you to answer to me why Donald Trump isn't a gigantic coward from running from Vietnam. Don't tell me about an assassination attempt, okay? That's a different thing, and I gave him credit for that. Tell me about why he ran from Vietnam and let poor and middle-class Americans die for him while he bragged about going to orgies instead.
I don't know the details of like what exactly went on with his Vietnam stuff, but I will say this is the obvious comparison. He was 22 when Vietnam was going on. Tim Walz was a grown man and the leader of his unit, and he abandoned them.
So since he was a spoiled little brat, and his daddy had given him $400 million and he was 22 and he wanted to get laid, he let other people die for him. That seems like a really compelling argument. You guys seem super brave and really into veterans.
I mean, Tim Walz did exactly that. He could have gone with his unit. 3 of his unit died. These were the men he was leading and told he would deploy with them. And then he left.
50,000 died in Vietnam. none of them were billionaires' kids, that's for sure. None of them were rich kids like Donald Trump who all dodged. And when you dodge a draft like that, what you say is, I don't mind if a kid from Minnesota or Nebraska dies on my behalf. I got orgies to go to. You know what Donald Trump did with veterans who were homeless in front of Trump Tower? He had them removed. He thought that they lowered his property values because those veterans went to Vietnam. Oh, I guess they were traumatized because Daddy didn't get them out. So here, get them off of in front of my Trump Tower. This rich bitch who ran, who never served, who was a giant coward, who doesn't know which ankle had the bone spurs, has a temerity to go after a veteran who served for over 2 decades and has the medals to show for it. It's disgusting.
Let me, maybe this is a good place to start winding down the conversation, because does any of this actually matter? Like, that's the question I want to pitch to both of you. This is the vice president, the vice presidential nominee, that is. So does litigating the details of his departure from Army National Guard, like whether it's that, whether it's his economic policies, is it going to have a meaningful effect on the Harris ticket or on the Trump-Vance ticket? Like, is Tim Walz, does he really matter? And I'll start with you on that one, Cenk.
Yeah, look, I have to play defense on it because these guys are immoral. So they keep smearing every Democratic candidate in the same exact way. Oh, you dare to serve in our armed services? We're going to use it against you. We're going to weaponize it. So I'm not going to let them do that, okay? Especially when their party is filled to the rim with cowards who never serve. Okay, so you don't get to smear veterans after you chose to run from every battle and start those wars and then never serve in them. So I'm not going to let them get away with it. In terms of what people vote on, go ahead, do your immoral smears of veterans. It's not going to work. The only thing people care about is, how does this election affect my life? There's many reasons I was against Biden, but one of them was, he kept talking about my legacy and I got to have a second term, et cetera. I'm like, yeah, brother, what's your policies? How are you going to help the average American? But now we have a team that has a track record of helping. I mean, you want to talk about Tim Walz, you're attacking him. He has a track record of passing dozens of bills that help the average person in Minnesota. That's why he's intensely popular in his own state. That's why these bills worked, because they weren't about ego building for Tim Walz. They were about actually improving the lives of Americans. And Donald Trump doesn't have that record. He has a record of what? He did one giant bill when he was in office. Enormous corporate tax cuts for his donors. And that's his legacy. So he's going to run on that. Oh, I helped all the corporations. Oh, all the corporations are my best friends. I gave them all the biggest tax breaks, and they're all now much richer, and you guys have to pay more taxes because of it. Go ahead, run on that record. And I think that it's going to be super obvious who people should vote for. I think we're going to win this actually relatively easily now.
And Will, any final words, if you got like 1 minute to talk to the swing voter who is going to decide this election, or swing, like whether they're going to vote or not vote, might be their swing decision. What do you say to them about this pick?
Like, really, are you better off right now than you were under the Trump administration economically? The economy was booming under Trump, and it absolutely crashed under Biden. Inflation is out of control. If you even go to the grocery store, you can tell gas prices are out of control. And why? They're at war with domestic energy. I mean, Kamala Harris wants to ban fracking. She said that repeatedly. So you have, I mean, if you're talking about just core economic issues, like, is this good? Is this team, Harris-Walz, going to be good for your pocketbook? It's not. They have a slew of bad policies. Meanwhile, they're trying to portray Trump-Vance as Romney-Ryan. It's a different Republican Party. This is a pro-worker Republican Party that had the leader of the Teamsters on at the convention. You can both be pro-worker and not indulge in insane green delusions that kill your economy. And that's what the Republicans are all about.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you guys.
I was going to say that's an interesting place to end, because I think Will just previewed where Republican messaging will want to go, and whether or not Donald Trump carries that successfully is an open question. Trump and others carry that successfully is an open question, and how it works against Walz is an open question. So thank you both. That was a very helpful discussion.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.